The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Suspicion had always been a silent guest in the Abbott mansion, but this time, it carried a sharper edge. Jack Abbott and Diane Jenkins, though often at odds in the past, found themselves aligned by something far more powerful than pride, instinct. They both sensed that something about Clare Grace simply didn't add up. Her charm was convincing, her composure disarming, and yet beneath that polished exterior lay an aura that neither of them could shake. Jack tried to convince himself that he might be overreacting, that Kyle's happiness mattered more than his unease, but every time he looked at Clare, he saw a shadow of deceit flicker behind her eyes. Diane, however, didn't just sense danger, she felt it. Her intuition, honed by years of surviving betrayal, manipulation, and her own share of secrets, told her that the young woman now entangled with her son was hiding something monumental. Kyle's sudden decision to marry Clare only made their anxiety worse. To Jack, it was recklessness, to Diane, it was a warning sign. Kyle had always been passionate, impulsive when it came to love, but this time his insistence felt almost desperate, as though he were under some spell he couldn't break. The relationship had moved too fast, too conveniently, and it unfolded at a time when both families were still rebuilding their foundations. Jack couldn't help but remember all the times he'd watched people infiltrate his family under the guise of affection, only to reveal ulterior motives once trust had been gained. Diane's mind went further. She had seen too many faces like Clare's before, women who smiled sweetly while weaving their way into the most vulnerable parts of powerful men's lives. Jack and Diane's private conversations grew longer and quieter. They began retracing Clare's past, analyzing inconsistencies, cross-referencing dates, asking subtle questions in the kind of cautious rhythm that only seasoned survivors of betrayal understand. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, was unsettling. Clare's records were perfectly neat, too neat. Every story she told had just enough truth to pass as genuine, yet none of them led to verifiable roots. Diane's instincts sharpened. Something inside her whispered that Clare's identity wasn't just fabricated, it was engineered. Jack, while reluctant to act on speculation, couldn't deny the pattern forming before his eyes. Still, he hesitated, fearing that confronting Kyle too soon would only drive him deeper into Clare's arms. But Diane had no such reservations. To her, waiting was a luxury they couldn't afford. She began to quietly observe Clare's behavior, the late-night calls, the hushed tone when she thought no one was listening, the peculiar calm she carried even when tension surrounded her. It wasn't the demeanor of a woman in love, it was the precision of someone managing an agenda. Diane's maternal instincts turned protective, but they also turned investigative. She started following Clare discreetly, learning her patterns, watching the places she visited, the envelopes she carried, the hesitation in her step whenever someone mentioned Victoria Newman's name. It was as though the very sound of it triggered something, a flash of discomfort, perhaps guilt, quickly concealed by a polite smile. Jack tried to pull Diane back, warning her not to cross the line, but it was already too late. The more Diane uncovered, the more convinced she became that Clare was not who she claimed to be. Her gut told her that this woman's connection to the Newmans went far deeper than anyone suspected, and that Kyle, blinded by infatuation, was being used as a pawn in a much larger game. The tension between mother and son escalated until Diane could barely hide her frustration. She knew that Kyle wouldn't believe her without proof, and proof, as fate would have it, was waiting just beyond the boundary of law and morality. One night, when the storm clouds rolled over Genoa City and the streets fell silent, Diane made a choice she would never be able to take back. She broke into Clare's home. The act wasn't impulsive, it was deliberate, driven by an unbearable mixture of fear and certainty. She moved through the rooms with a steady hand, the faint glow of her phone flashlight illuminating fragments of Clare's life, photographs, letters, carefully arranged decorations that felt too curated, as if designed to tell a story rather than reflect a real one. Everything seemed sterile, impersonal, staged. But then she found the study, and that was where the illusion began to crumble. Inside a locked drawer, tucked beneath neatly stacked folders, Diane discovered an envelope marked with initials that made her blood run cold. It contained a set of documents, medical records, legal papers, and a DNA report sealed with the name of a well-known testing facility. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the sheets, reading and rereading the names printed in black ink: Clare Grace and Victoria Newman. The numbers and markers on the page told the story her instincts had already whispered. The results were inconsistent with the official records. Clare was not Victoria's biological daughter. She wasn't who she claimed to be at all. The real Clare, the one everyone believed they'd come to know, might never have existed in the first place. Diane's heart pounded as she pieced together the implications. If Clare's DNA didn't match Victoria's, then who was she? Why had she inserted herself into the Newmans' lives, and by extension, into Kyle's? It dawned on Diane that this wasn't just deception, it was infiltration. The woman living under the Newman name had built her identity on a lie so intricate that even Victoria, sharp and guarded, had failed to see through it. Diane took photos of the documents before carefully placing them back exactly where she'd found them, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this woman an imposter working for someone else, perhaps a rival family, or a hidden benefactor with unfinished business in Genoa City? Or was she acting alone, driven by something far more personal and dangerous? When Diane returned home that night, drenched from the rain and shaking from adrenaline, Jack knew instantly that something monumental had happened. Her silence was heavy, her eyes darker than he'd seen in years. When she finally showed him the evidence, the shock that crossed his face was unmistakable. For Jack, the revelation struck deeper than just fear for Kyle's safety. It felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal. He'd let this woman into his family, into his home, into the sacred circle that bore the Abbott name. The thought that she might be manipulating them all for some hidden purpose filled him with a cold fury that only decades of scars could produce. Diane, though vindicated, was terrified. She knew that exposing Clare could unleash a storm, not just in Kyle's life, but across Genoa City. The Newmans and the Abbotts had a long history of fragile truces and volatile alliances. Revealing that Victoria's supposed daughter was an imposter would ignite another war, one that could destroy both families in ways even Victor might not be able to control. But silence was not an option. Clare's deception, whatever its origin, was now a ticking bomb. Meanwhile, Clare's behavior began to subtly shift. It was as if she sensed the walls closing in. She remained outwardly calm, but her eyes darted more often, her responses became more calculated. When Diane tried to engage her in casual conversation, the young woman's smile seemed forced, her words a fraction too measured. She knew she was being watched. The question was whether she already suspected what Diane had done. Clare's composure, once charming, now carried an eerie quality, the poise of someone who had rehearsed this role for so long that even exposure didn't frighten her anymore. Jack and Diane faced a moral crossroads. Should they confront Clare directly and risk pushing her into defensive chaos, or should they quietly involve the Newmans and risk igniting a feud that could spiral out of control? Their discussions grew heated, with Jack leaning toward caution and Diane urging decisive action. She feared that if they waited, Kyle would be trapped in a marriage that could end not just in heartbreak, but in catastrophe. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of Genoa City, another layer of truth waited to surface. The false DNA records hinted at a deeper conspiracy. Someone with access, money, and motive had helped Clare craft her identity. Whether it was done for revenge, inheritance, or a secret buried in the Newman legacy, one thing was certain: the woman Kyle loved was not the woman she claimed to be. By the time the sun rose over the Abbott estate, Diane had already made up her mind. She would not rest until she uncovered every piece of the truth. Clare had underestimated her, thought she was just another overprotective mother desperate to control her son's life. But Diane Jenkins had survived far worse than deceit. She had been betrayed, vilified, even presumed dead. And every time, she had returned stronger. This time would be no different. As the young and the restless moves forward, the tension between trust and truth will test every character connected to this revelation. Jack will struggle to protect his family without reigniting old wars, Kyle will be forced to choose between love and loyalty, and Diane will find herself in a battle not just for her son's future, but for the integrity of the Abbott name. And when the truth about Claire's real identity finally emerges, when Victoria learns that the woman she believed was her daughter may, in fact, be a stranger, the fallout will shatter the fragile peace of Genoa City once again. Because in this town, no secret stays buried forever. Under the soft glow of the Abbott estate's night lamps, Diane Jenkins's trembling hands could barely hold the evidence she had just unearthed. For all her suspicions, nothing could have prepared her for the truth now staring back at her in black and white. The real identity of Clare Grace was not merely a deception, it was a horror. She was Jordan's daughter. The same Jordan who had once terrorized Genoa City with a chilling mixture of obsession and vengeance, a woman whose name had become synonymous with manipulation, cruelty, and unrelenting hatred toward the Newman family. The revelation hit Diane like a physical blow. Suddenly every smile, every innocent word, every polite gesture from Clare replayed in her mind like scenes from a psychological thriller. It all made sense now, the calm facade, the quick wit, the way she seemed to know too much about everyone's weaknesses. She wasn't a lost soul looking for belonging, she was a predator hiding behind the illusion of grace. Her stomach churned as the full picture formed. Clare had been living under the same roof as her son, Kyle, building trust, weaving her way into the family's daily life while hiding a darkness that defied comprehension. What Diane found among Clare's personal things confirmed her worst nightmare. Inside a sleek, locked chest hidden beneath the false floor of a closet lay an arsenal. Poison vials labeled with precision, firearms meticulously cleaned and wrapped in cloth, and a series of knives that gleamed under the faint light like silent promises. There were files too, dossiers on various residents of Genoa City, including Victoria, Jack, and even Sharon. Every page detailed routines, habits, weaknesses, information too thorough to be the result of curiosity. This was the work of a trained operative, someone conditioned to kill, to manipulate, to disappear. Clare was no accidental imposter, she was a professional assassin, a legacy of Jordan's twisted legacy of vengeance. Diane's breath came fast, panic clawing at her throat. She realized that she and Jack had not just uncovered a lie, they had stepped into the crosshairs of a killer. The woman now playing the role of Kyle's fiancée was a ticking time bomb, and her ultimate goal was no longer just infiltration. It was annihilation. Clare, it seemed, had been preparing for something massive, something far more sinister than emotional manipulation or financial gain. The existence of so many toxins suggested premeditated intent, the weapons signaled planning, and the DNA forgery revealed an intelligence network capable of altering records at the highest levels. Jack entered the room moments later, and one look at Diane's face told him everything he needed to know. His voice was low and hoarse, demanding to understand, but the only thing she could say was the name that chilled him to his core, Jordan. He felt his blood run cold. The name itself was enough to conjure years of destruction, plots, abductions, near-deaths. Now that legacy had returned in a new form, more dangerous and deceptive than before. The daughter Jordan had once raised in shadows had not only survived her mother's madness but evolved beyond it. Clare had learned to weaponize innocence. What made it even more monstrous was the detail that Clare had let her own mother die. Reports from Diane's hurried search of digital files and old case notes suggested that when Jordan's last confrontation with the Newmans spiraled out of control, Clare chose self-preservation over loyalty. She stood by as her mother succumbed to the consequences of her own schemes, watching without remorse. The act wasn't born of moral reckoning, it was opportunistic. With Jordan gone, Clare could rewrite her own story, reinvent herself as the orphan daughter Victoria never had, embedding herself into the Newman family for a life of privilege, influence, and power. Every smile she offered Victoria, every tear she shed about her lost childhood, was a carefully rehearsed performance. She wasn't the victim she claimed to be, she was the heir to Jordan's cruelty, more cunning, more methodical, and infinitely more patient. Diane's fear quickly transformed into rage. How dare this woman infiltrate her family, endanger her son, and desecrate everything Jack and she had worked so hard to protect? She wanted to run, but the fury rising inside her refused to let her leave quietly. Jack, however, understood the gravity of their situation. The weapons and poison meant Claire wasn't just a con artist, she was lethal. Every second they remained inside that house was a gamble with their lives. He grabbed Diane by the arm, insisting they leave immediately, but even as they hurried out, Diane's mind was already racing with the next step. This couldn't end with escape. The world had to know the truth. When they reached the car, the rain was pouring hard, masking their voices and the terror pulsing between them. Diane's fury erupted. She had been doubted, dismissed, underestimated countless times before, but not now. Not when she had proof. She was determined to expose Claire for what she truly was, a murderer in disguise, a daughter of a woman who once tried to destroy half of Genoa City. She would not allow history to repeat itself. Jack, ever the strategist, cautioned her against going public without protection. If Claire realized they had discovered her secret, she might strike first. But Diane was beyond caution. The thought of Kyle alone with that woman, trusting her, possibly lying beside her that very night, made her blood boil. Her maternal instincts overpowered every ounce of reason. She imagined Claire watching from the shadows as they fled, her eyes cold and calculating, already anticipating their next move. Diane's only comfort was that she had the evidence, the DNA files, the photos of the poisons, the digital copy of the forged identity documents saved to her phone. She clutched the device like a weapon, as though the truth it held could somehow shield them from what was coming. But deep down, she knew the danger wasn't over. Exposing Claire would not be simple, it would trigger a chain reaction involving the Newmans, the Abbotts, and anyone unlucky enough to stand in the crossfire. Back at the Abbott mansion, Jack and Diane began planning. They needed to contact Victoria immediately, but even that posed a risk. If Claire was monitoring communications, and given her background, she likely was, then any sudden meeting or call could alert her. They would have to be strategic, perhaps involve Michael Baldwin or Christine, someone who could discreetly verify the documents and ensure protection. Yet Diane's patience was thinning. The image of Claire smiling sweetly at Kyle's side burned in her mind, an image that now felt like mockery. She vowed that before the sun rose again, the world would know the monster living under the guise of love. What made the situation even more precarious was the realization that Claire had been anticipating discovery all along. Among the files Diane had found were contingency plans, escape routes, false passports, and coded messages suggesting that if her cover were ever blown, she would disappear before anyone could stop her. It was a chess game, and Claire had already thought several moves ahead. The Abbotts were not just dealing with a liar, they were facing a strategist raised in deceit, a predator bred for survival. As dawn approached, Diane's fear settled into a cold, focused determination. She refused to let her family be destroyed by another Jordan. This time, she would strike first. She would gather Jack, Kyle, and Victoria, and she would expose the entire web of deceit in one devastating blow. The thought of confrontation filled her with dread, but also a sense of purpose. She wasn't the same woman who once ran from her mistakes, she was the one who had returned from the dead to protect her own. Claire might have fooled everyone else, but she had underestimated the fire of a mother defending her family. In the corridors of the Newman Tower, the stage was already being set for an explosive reckoning. When Diane arrived with Jack at her side, files in hand, and demanded to see Victoria, the world of the young and the restless would once again tremble on its axis. Because beneath all the glamour and power, Genoa City had always been a city of secrets, and this one, more than any before, had the power to burn it all down. And as for Claire, somewhere in the dark, perhaps even watching them through a window, she was already preparing her next move. For her, the game wasn't over. It had only just begun.